All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here. My name is Michael Blacken. Like the voice of God said, I am with Accenture. I've been here for about 5 years. Before that, I was with Oracle for 15 years. So being back at Oracle AI World is like a bit of a homecoming for me, so great to see everybody here. I'd like to also introduce my partners in crime here, the Chief Technology Officer for Accenture Security, Rex Thexton, and the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for T-Mobile, Mr. Chris Wallace.
Hello. Oh, where's lunch points? Lights are bright.
So why are we here? So the purpose of this session is to talk about how do we get past the barriers to adoption that we have in the move towards agentic AI, particularly around security. Right? Security is a concern for quite a few different things, and agentic AI security, we were just talking to some folks right before we got on stage, is definitely a preventative to that move to realize that value. So when we look at the statistics, we did a survey, and 96% of executives expect a significant increase in adoption of agentic AI. However, only 77% of those folks feel like their security capabilities is keeping pace with the rapid onset of technology that agentic AI brings. Right? And when we look at the fact that agentic AI is moving across multiple clouds and all the different agents and all the different platforms, right, it just creates enormous complexity and increases the attack surface. In other words, all the different cracks in the architecture that hackers love to try to exploit, they're much, much worse when we're talking about multi-cloud environments. So there's a lot to talk about. And so to do that, we're going to start with Chris, and Chris is going to talk about the T-Mobile journey to agentic AI. And then I'm going to come back on, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Oracle-centric view from an agentic AI security perspective. And then Rex is going to come and bring his visionary point of view to how we're moving forward in the future and how we can accelerate that journey for each of you who are here today. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Michael. It's a good segue. He said there's a lot to talk about. The Irish in me likes to spin a tale, so I'll rely on my friends to kick me if I get too long in the tooth here. But on the slide here that we'll show here in just a second, we have a little bit of a leg up. So about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago at this point, our now previous CEO, Mike Sievert, decided that he wanted to invest very heavily into AI. And so he came up with a mantra that he's been beating into everybody at the company since that time, where he wants us to take the approach of being AI first, data-driven, and really focused on enhancing the customer experience using those tools, right? So instead of having 15 million people that sit here and review customer accounts every single day, how can we rely on models in agentic AI to basically do that on behalf of those agents and then allow them to service the customers before they even know that they have issues that might arise with their communications, cell signals, billing problems, et cetera. And so we've been really leaning heavily into that investment. And as such, the company's invested pretty heavily in making sure that not only does it operate properly, but also is secure. And we started with a lot of the business problems that you can kind of see outlined here, and probably a lot of the problems that most of you have today as well. What are the models doing? Where do they call? Who's doing what? What information are we feeding into it? How can we protect that information? How can we make sure that information doesn't get into the hands of competitors in the case of bots and things like that that we might build to service those things? How do we prevent people from grabbing unapproved or models that we don't have good visibility into the environment? How do we make sure we scale the security testing? The list kind of goes on and on, but the same basic security problems that you would apply for anything really that you want to introduce to your environment, whether it be a current capability or a net new one. So fortunately for us, because that top-down view was already kind of focused on AI, And to be transparent with everybody here, if we were having this conversation, we'll say 3 years ago, our security story was much different. So we've made some pretty significant investments in security to kind of rectify both the image and perception of what T-Mobile security looks like in the past couple of years. As such, the approach that we've taken is, I would say, kind of midway, right? We're going to hear a little bit about some opportunities that the team will talk about in a second on things we can do to mature and enhance those pieces, but it started very grassroots and very simple. And so the very first thing that we did was establish our Data and AI Council. We already had kind of a group that was supposed to be overseeing data stewardship, data retention, the legacy of data and kind of where it came from, where it goes, what it transforms into. And so they took that group and said, you're now responsible for AI as well. And that group is made up of kind of a smorgasbord of everybody across the enterprise. There's security representation, there's data SME representation, there is legal procurement, kind of everybody you would expect that would have a part to play in procuring, installing, and then configuring, managing, operating any sort of AI modules, models, languages, et cetera. Then we said we should probably take a stab at doing some actual adversary testing against these models. And that's when we quickly realized we also needed to split two of these things into two, right? If we start talking about AI security, it gets very conflated with things that you want to do to secure the AI that you're bringing into your environment, e.g. some models you're installing or a platform or tool that you purchased has some AI capabilities that you need to test, and things that we wanted to use AI to further enhance security things. So we looked at splitting those two out, making sure that we had very clear goals and supporting those, again with the top-down approach and then connected with the council. But now we're sitting here with the next set of problems, which is this works at a very small scale. We can absolutely look at one-off models, one-off platforms, one-off environments that implement some version of AI, whether it be AI-assisted or AI-led. And we do a very good job of that bespoke in a microcosm. But looking at how we scale that has been kind of our next big challenge. And when we think about places like the Azure marketplace that have models on them, or all these other places that are popping up to offer these types of capabilities to really unleash your workforce and make sure that they have the ability to move as quickly as they'd like with the investments you're also trying to get out of those, how do we balance that with the security side of it to make sure that when people are using these things, we have at least some level of confidence that the things that they're doing are secure and not doing things that are unexpected or not what we want? So to that end, we've been trying to use AI to secure AI, and there's a lot of grassroots efforts there where we're trying to build some of those capabilities ourselves. One of the teams that I support is specifically focused on this area, and we wanted to build first, buy second, so that we had the capability ourselves, and if and when we ever had to modify something that we bought, configured, partner with a different team, that we had at least some level of the capabilities ourselves without having to rely wholly on someone else to tell us what to do. And so that's kind of the high-level version of our journey, right? We started very manual. We're kind of leaning into an automated way, but a lot of the same security principles that we have tried to apply about every other technology still apply here today, right? Do you know who's running it? Do you know what the inventory is? What do your operations look like to make sure that you're securing it? And then how do you scale it so that you don't become a boondoggle in the process? You're enabling that innovation, but also you're making sure that you can give the company kind of a high level of confidence that the things that they're doing within that enablement are secure. So I'll turn over here back to the group. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those core capabilities that they offer and that we're blending in with some of the things that we can do from a partnership perspective and then kind of off on our own.
All right, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
So talking about how at Accenture, we've been working with Oracle around AI, doing implementations, digital transformations. That leads to a lot of opportunity to find business benefit from Agentic AI, and working with T-Mobile on their digital transformation. I've found a lot of benefit from that, and really just understanding, what are the real world lessons learned that we can take away and harvest and provide to other clients that are going through the same process. And so the things that come to mind, start with things like governance, securing AI environments, resilience, right? There's a lot of different things that we can talk about. Securing agentic AI is a vast macrocosm of different topics, but to fit us into a 45-minute session, I'm just going to focus on a few different things, mostly the ones in the middle, right? And also, those are the ones that are more technology-driven. So when we're talking about how can we use Oracle tools and Accenture's experience together to provide a secure foundation for AI and to secure the multi-cloud environment that invariably is created from it, these are the things that are key. And so I'm going to boil them down into essentially 3 different topics. The first is secure by design, and Chris talked a little bit about that. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on it. Second is identity first, zero trust, which is critically important for particularly dealing with the fact that there's all these agents out there that need to deal with the fact that there are users and there are non-human users all out there that need to be continuously authenticated. And then third is around data-driven access controls, right? So how do we make sure that we are providing access to data in a way that makes sense for that data, considering how many different kinds of data there is in an AI infrastructure and architecture. So let's start with secure by design. So again, secure by design means that we're taking a proactive approach to how we secure things, right? And by being proactive, we're baking security in at the beginning of a project versus bolting it on at the end. And when we bolt it on at the end, right, that's where we're going to wind up with a lot of vulnerabilities because there are all sorts of things we didn't plan for that are out there. Now, when we look at secure by design, we need to make sure that we're addressing the entire delivery cycle. So that means we're going to be doing it in the pre-production environments, we're going to be doing it in the production environments, and then we're going to be doing it in the post-production run and maintain portion. So let's start with pre-production. So pre-production, we're building our model, we're training it, we're bringing in the data, we're starting to build the agents, right? There's a lot of security that isn't implemented in those development environments, those test environments, those prototypes, right? Because they're not quite ready to be released into the wild. So in those cases, what we have found with other clients that make a lot of sense is to really isolate them and to protect them using things like, in an Oracle context, Oracle has in its OCI design virtual cloud networking. So OCI VCNs allow us to create private subnets around things that prevent anybody from getting access to them, protects our model from tampering, protects our data from loss. In addition to that, there's firewalls, web application firewalls, network firewalls. Oracle provides all of those as well to further protect and isolate the work that we're doing in those development, test, and prototype environments. So that's pre-prod. Then we talk about prod, and one of the things that has been really useful is Oracle has a set of CIS-compliant landing zone scripts, and CIS is the Centers for Internet Security. It's a standards body that says what does good look like when it comes to security. And so CIS-compliant landing zone Terraform scripts are a starting point that we can then adapt for the workload. So in this case, the workload being an AI model or AI agents that we're building, we can build out the infrastructure as code in Terraform or Ansible or any other scripting language that supports that so that we can make sure that what we're building in OCI is actually aligned with what our design was. And that automates the process, removes the human element from the process, and of course the human element is where a lot of vulnerabilities wind up coming from, so automating it is a really good idea. So that's prod, is to use infrastructure as code. And then post-production, when we've actually got these things in run and maintain mode over time, it's about continuously monitoring the configuration to make sure that it stays in alignment with our design. So over time, little bits of configuration get changed. Developers make changes to agents. Things happen that diverge what we have from our design. And so Oracle has a product called CloudGuard. CloudGuard does that continuous monitoring, has detection and remediation of configurations such that it can make changes to anything that has been pushed out of the realm of what the design called for and into the realm of what would become a vulnerability, and to automatically change it back. And so we can make sure that in post-production that we have our security posture stays in alignment with our original design for as long as we want. And our design may change over time, but what we really want to make sure that we have is at least a point of view of when it diverges. And that's what CloudGuard as a AI posture management product can give us. So that's something we have found is very, very useful for the post-production environments. So that's secure by design. The second piece was around identity first, zero trust. And with identity first, zero trust, it's all about who are you, and based on who you are, what can you do and what can you see, right? So based on who are you, that's all about authentication, right? So authentication is to check your credentials, make sure you are who you say you are, multi-factor. But what we have found through these implementations that we've done is it's really important to do authentication continuously. It's not enough to do it once and then push it down into the architecture and trust that within that, okay, they've authenticated, so they must be okay, right? With AI, particularly agentic AI, particularly with multi-cloud agentic AI, that sense of who the logged in user is can be lost very easily. And so making sure that that identity persists through all the layers of the architecture, all the way down to the model, to the agents, to the data underlying all of it is critically important. So continuous authentication. And doing that in a multi-cloud environment, we recommend using an enterprise identity provider like an Entra ID or Ping or Okta or even OCI IAM from an Oracle perspective as an identity provider across domains. So that's authentication. And then once we know who you are, the question is, what are you capable of? What can you do and see? And so then we're talking about authorization. And the first thing about authorization is least privilege. So in security, there's a concept called the principle of least privilege, which basically means I can only do and see the things that I have a business need to do and see. And anything else, I'm not allowed to touch. So from a least privilege perspective, again, that gets really tricky in an agentic AI point of view because, again, it's really easy for who I am to get lost. So propagating the identity down into the architecture so that it can make use of the access controls in the local systems and have local enforcement of the access controls is really important. So that's second. Then, on top of that, there's this concept of context, right? It's not enough just to know who I am. There's all sorts of relationships that I have or places that I am that affect what my context is. So for example, if I'm a doctor working in a hospital and I'm using, say, an AI system to do some diagnostic imaging and I want to interpret that with AI assistance, then based on who I am, the doctor, where I am, I'm physically in the hospital right now, and what my relationship is, I am the doctor of record of this particular patient, then yes, it will say I am authorized to see this sensitive information about this patient, their medical history, for example, that anybody else wouldn't be allowed to see, right? So that context matters, and again, making sure that context filters down to all the other parts of the architecture. Now, all of that sounds great, but how do we actually do that? So one of the things that Accenture's been working at lately is we have a partnership with NVIDIA, and we have an OCI version of this now. It's called our AI Refinery. And the AI Refinery is what we use to create agentic AI systems at scale for our clients. And what the AI Refinery can do is it can pull the access controls from the data sources that it's pulling the data from and essentially bind the data to the access controls so that wherever the data goes, the access controls stay with them. So think of the typical case. In the typical case, you've got data in a database. It's got access controls. It's got encryption. It's got masking and all sorts of things, right? But when you take the data out of that database, all of those capabilities go away, and now I've just got data, right? In this case, imagine taking all of those access controls and encryptions and masking and things with it wherever it goes. So that's really important as well. So that's identity first, zero trust. And then the final one I'm going to talk about is data-driven access controls, right? So how do we secure the data throughout this really complex data journey that is agentic AI? So first of all, think of all the different kinds of data that you might have in an agentic AI implementation. You might have structured data, right? It might come from Oracle ERP Cloud, Oracle HCM Cloud, autonomous database, all of those sorts of things. And then there's semi-structured database, XML files, JSON files, things like that. And then totally unstructured data like Word documents, images, emails, things like that, right? And so all those pieces of data might be pulled into a model for training or may be pulled into by agents for supplemental information or to do particular tasks for us, right? So from a different kinds of data perspective, each one of those different kinds of data has different ways of securing them, different privacy implications, different regulatory implications, right? So all of that needs to be taken into account, and again, it gets really complicated. So one of the ways we have found should make that a lot easier is Oracle's AI Studio. So Oracle's AI Studio has these connectors to do things like be able to attach to ERP Cloud and HCM Cloud and things like that, and be able to propagate those access controls from Oracle SaaS applications into their AI agents. And so what I'm allowed to do can be reflected by what the agent is allowed to do. So if I'm processing an invoice through an AI chatbot, and that AI chatbot tells one of the agents to approve the invoice in ERP Cloud, it'll only be able to do that if I, as the initial user, had that access control, and so it can propagate all the way down to the agent taking that particular action. So that's AI Studio, and then there's another aspect of AI that is also really complicated. It's called RAG. RAG is an acronym for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So essentially, imagine the way it was before when AI systems like a ChatGPT would give you information, but if you asked it who won the Super Bowl last year, it wouldn't know because its training data ended in like 2022 or whatever it was, right? So what RAG does is it retrieves information, augments the response, and then generates a personalized response, a retrieval augmented generation. So the example is like I'm an e-commerce vendor, I've got an AI chatbot, I've got a person who wants to know what's the cheapest, best laptop that I can find that you have in stock right now. So my RAG system can go out and it can check inventory systems, it can check multiple places where there are reviews of particular laptops, things like that, and come back and bring all of that together, personalize a response, and give it to the end user. And that reduces hallucinations because it can do error checking against multiple sources. It prevents us from having issues with information being out of date and inaccurate. So that's RAG. And so RAG also has all of these security implications because, again, if I'm checking inventory systems, how does it know if I have the access controls to do inventory systems? And then the final piece I'm going to talk about from a security perspective with AI is guardrails. So guardrails are part of the OCI Gen AI service. And what they can do is they can protect the AI system from inbound attacks, like prompt injection attacks. And also on the outbound, it can protect against saying too much, right? Giving away personally identifiable information, giving away IP that you don't want to be released, right? So guardrails prevent inbound attacks and prevent outbound oversharing. And it's interesting that prompt injection is PI, personally identifiable information is PII, and then intellectual property is IP. All I's and P's.
All of them.
just occurred to me. Anyway, so that's the Oracle view. This is what we've learned from the implementations that we've done over these past couple of years as we've gotten into agentic AI. And hopefully that's helpful to all of y'all. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rex to talk about his vision for AI going forward.
Yep. No, thank you, Michael. Yeah, so I think one of the things we don't want to do is scare you into thinking this is going to slow you down. This is to help you speed up, right? I think it's kind of funny. If you look at when we first started on this journey after ChatGPT came out, everybody ran and did assistants, and it's moving so fast. I remember one team was showing some stuff, and I said a year ago that was awesome. Now it's embarrassing, right? Because it's like the industry has moved so fast that we have to keep up and move with it. And I think, when we talk about, and Chris talked about their AI council and governance, I think that is a super important function to help keep you moving at pace. And how that you can do that is by having it be able to adapt and keep up with what is going on and change and make standards. Because a lot of, we all work for big companies, we all have controls, we all have things in place. And if you make those controls static, you will not be able to adapt and evolve, because those controls will hold you back and policies will hold you back. So being able to look at those and adapt those and apply, lack of a better term, common sense to helping drive that, that'll actually help you speed up and keep pace. Because you have your general counsel, your risk, the security team, the business, everybody wants to unlock value using this capability. And so if you have the right people in the room that can make real decisions quickly and keep you guys moving at pace, that is a super important function. And if organized correctly. If organized incorrectly, it can be an inhibitor to unlocking value. So I think, I remember, I was telling these guys while we were preparing, I think 2 years ago, or 18 months ago, I was on a CISO. We have this Accenture cybersecurity forum with about 200 CISOs around the world, and everybody was talking about governance, and that was the first step in step one. And and circling back a year later, some had adopted and evolved, and others felt it was slowing things down. So it's a super important function if ran correctly. And so I think, if you can take anything back to your organizations, that's something to look at from that perspective. I think, Michael talked a lot about protecting and securing data models and infrastructure. And I think one of the things that we've seen for clients struggling, and even us at times, to be able to unlock the value of AI is we're all stuck with a ton of tech debt, right? Legacy systems that don't support APIs or the ability to put MCP servers in front of them and agents and whatnot and do these things. And so a lot of what we're trying to do and help people unlock that through the ability to, we call it low-cost modernization, right? Getting, the vendors that are selling the tools and other people to kind of go in and invest in helping getting clients onto the latest technology so that they can help drive that. But I think the other aspect that Chris and Michael both brought up was, embed security by design. If it's embedded in your process, in your design, in your pipelines, in your SDLC, you can move a lot faster. When it's not embedded, what typically happens is you start doing a lot of chasing and potentially, bad things may happen, or when your security guys come and test it, they'll shut you down because bad things could happen. And so it's super important to have that, embed security by design in all aspects of it. I think if you look at in the agentic world, we've been working with a lot of different vendors and folks, but you think about, Michael talked about zero trust concept, but you think, right now you have one identity, you have access to, Oracle EBS, you have different access to database rights, you have all these privileges, right? Well, what we've seen is you create an agent that goes and connects to one of those systems, and then you try and provide the context, but sometimes with that context, it is not constant. You can ask it a different question and go get access to the the data that you're not supposed to get access to. And so being able to manage your identity infrastructure and have that embedded into what you do, because I think within our AI refinery, I think I heard something around, we had 3,000 agents, right? Well, each of those agents talk to maybe one or many systems and have many different privileges on those systems. So being able to manage what those agents can have access to and have a governance process around that out of the gate makes it go super fast and allows you to unlock that value a lot sooner. I think Chris brought up, this is the fun part. I think this is probably of my job is we're trying to reinvent how we deliver security services to our clients. And a lot of that is using, agents and using AI to secure AI. And so what's exciting about that is that we get to be able to go in and do things that typically would be very manual and labor intensive and prone to error, human error, which is actually more fallible than usually AI in some of these lower tasks. And so we've been able to drive significant savings into our security operations that we perform for clients and drive that. And by doing that, it's helped us do a better job of learning, because we also, learning ourselves, learn how to protect agents better and what bad things could happen. Because if you look at the proliferation of, I'm sure a lot of you have some type of coding assistant, whether it's Cloud Code, Cursor, or Windsurf, or one of these tools that are building capabilities. I build something every week because I have more fun than ever just building stuff. I get an idea and I go, just spike it out. And then sometimes I'll take it all the way, and other times I'll hand it off to the team and say, hey, go build this out. And so we're building accelerators at a rate that we've never seen before. But that means applications or capabilities, agents can be built not in months, but in days, right? And being able to have, that's why that security by design is so important. But if you can get that into your pipeline, so when you go deploy it, when you go to build it, you have all those security checks in place. It makes everything go much smoother, and you can go significantly faster. That's including even test harnesses, everything, all driven into that. So I think that is super important in being able to, from the outset to from the build part, and then from the defense side, we're able to do detections significantly faster. I think I was talking last night, but we've seen where it used to take days and weeks to go. Once somebody infiltrated to go east-west in an environment, now I think fastest time I think was over 46 or 56 seconds. To where they were able to go in and start doing damage in an environment. So the whole world has changed. So being able to defend at pace and at scale, because imagine if you have eyes on glass and you're looking at it, you're not going to catch it in 56 seconds, but an agent can potentially, because they're working at a pace of that. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is there's going to be more autonomy when it comes to security and even business functions. You think about the car, right? The autonomous car, right? Where Waymos and Teslas are now. It was a step change, right? If you remember, it was partially autonomous. It would do it. It had the LiDAR. It would make sure you were in cruise control. It wouldn't go too fast. Then it got a little bit better. Then it started making so you couldn't shift lanes and do things. But I think that's where where we're at in security. We're on that journey to autonomous. And right now, we're probably more in assisted mode, going to maybe semi-autonomous. But if we can continue to drive that, I think we can, that will help your organizations be able to unlock the agentic value that much faster if you invest in modernizing your security infrastructures from that perspective. And I think, and going through the bottom layer, I think, there's a lot centered around this concept of AI security posture management, and that's being able to go out and do discovery of your environment and everything from the data that's feeding it to what actual data elements are in there, as well as the infrastructure that's supporting it, so you can have an end-to-end picture of what your AI estate looks like, and what you think it looks like and what it actually looks like, because there's a lot of shadow AI rolling around in organizations. And so that is a super important aspect to that. And I think, there's a lot of great, modern tools that are helping drive that. So I think, in fact, one quick message is you can't be stuck in legacy. Otherwise, you're going to hold yourself back, right? And I think the other aspect of it is try and get away from having too many tools. The typical thing in security is we tend to go buy another tool because it does this thing a little bit better. And so what we've tried, and that's where breaches happen. They happen in the seams typically. So I think one of the things is, make sure that you're not buying yet another tool, but making sure that the tools that you have are capable of doing what you need them to do, and drive that, because a bloated a bloated estate just makes things extra complicated from that perspective. And I think, from deploying secure AI solutions, I think Michael and Chris touched on that a lot. But I think those are all the tips and tricks. But I think if we can go in and help our stakeholders, whether they're business people, development teams, whoever, to go in and just practice those things, those security principles, and embed that into what they do, things will go a lot faster. Because typically we're called the no fun guys, right? We're the guys who slow everybody down, right? And so, in my other hat, where I'm trying to build all these things to go to go move our business forward, I'm going, what do you mean I can't do that? and so I get extremely frustrated because, I think if you watch multiple podcasts a week, when I'm out either exercising, going for a walk, or doing whatever. But I'm kind of the motto, go fast and break stuff, right? and I think we have to be in that mindset in order to drive that. But we have to have the right guardrails to protect our organizations and even ourselves. But and so it's super important that you get those principles embedded so that the controls are in there, not cumbersome, but they're effective. And I think it's more about effective controls versus cumbersome. Because you can make things super cumbersome, doesn't make it any more effective. It just makes it more of a pain from that perspective. And then obviously, defending against threats, that's Captain Obvious. But if you look at what we're doing today, there's so much out there, right? There's malware, ransomware, all these different attacks. And a lot of the attacks now are things that you would, I'm not gonna say which company, but there was, some significant breaches for some very large tech companies on a certain platform. It wasn't because they didn't defend well. It wasn't because they didn't do these things. It's because they didn't educate their end users not to be socially engineered. It was just really old school social engineering where they went in, tricked people, got credentials, and got into the systems. And so you still have to go out and train your people in good security awareness training and whatnot, but you still have to go out and drive those basic things, because we can put all this fancy stuff in, but if we don't teach people the basics, just bad things can still happen from that perspective. But there is a lot you can do to defend and catch things a lot faster before it gets bad in your organization. And lastly, Michael talked a lot about, responsible AI. That's something that we've been doing before AI became cool. I think, our tech vision in 2020 talked about responsible AI and doing the things. Because I think one of the things that can happen is you can create bias, right? There's this concept of bias in models, which skew results. I think, when in the early days, this was kind of the story. They went out and scoured all the, trained against all the resumes that for the people they hired in the last 15 years. And they were wondering why they weren't getting any diversity. Well, it was because they had been training it for 15 years, and the bias was they were all, hiring white middle-aged guys because that's who they were hiring 15 years ago. And so, it's just another example of bias. And the other aspect is data poisoning, right? And data poisoning is where people can inject, bad data into models that can create erroneous results and whatnot. So those are the types of things from a responsible AI perspective. But like I said, this is not to slow things down. It's just to make it's a way to make things go faster if you just do things the right way from the start, and it makes things go a lot smoother. I think the other thing too is you have to be agile. You cannot be stuck. You cannot be stuck. You cannot have a process that takes 3 months to make a decision anymore, because otherwise you will be just too late when it comes time. Your competitors will pass you by because they're not waiting 3 months, right? They're going in and saying, okay, there's this new thing. We're gonna test it. Checks it, and then this is how we're going to put the controls around it, and we're going to go, right? And so those are the types of things that you really have to take into account to drive this thing forward.
All right, thank you, Rex. So we're going to bring it in for a landing. Just to recap some of the key points we've been talking about here, make sure your AI security is embedded with secure by design, right? All of us talked about it. Critically important to think about security right off the bat. Secondly, identity first, zero trust, right? So how are we going to make sure that our users and non-human users are properly authenticated and authorized all the way throughout all the different levels of the architecture, all the different agents, all the different clouds, et cetera. And then finally, continuous verification at scale, right? How do we ensure that our AI is functioning properly and securely ongoing for the rest of the time after it's been put into production? So what's your call to action? First of all, make sure you know what AI systems you have, right? Because you can't secure what you don't know that you have. And we talked about it earlier. A lot of vendors put AI features into their products, and you might get an upgrade to an existing product and not even know that suddenly now there's some AI in that product that hadn't had it before. And if you have a process where you're looking at your AI models and making determinations, like Chris said T-Mobile is doing, as to which models are acceptable and which ones aren't, without knowing that they're actually in there, that's a problem, right? So know what your inventory of AI systems is, first and foremost. Secondly, policy enforcement at scale, right? So apply those zero trust principles, apply those identity first principles, apply that least privilege principle across your hybrid environment, your multi-cloud environments, et cetera. Make sure that you're looking at risk assessments continuously, right? It's really important to look at what the agent behavior is, what supply chain dependencies there might be, and what third-party integrations there are. Just like Rex said, the breaches happen in the seams of things. So make sure you're constantly looking at that. And then finally, incident response readiness, right? So how do you automate the detection and response for AI-specific threats like model poisoning and like rogue agent behavior? So that's what we want to leave you with. And again, what Accenture brings to help accelerate your journey to AI, our unique tools, our methodology, we can help you get there faster. If you have any questions, we're available after this session, and also we'll be at the booth if you want to come and find us. We're happy to talk more about this with anybody. So with that, if there's...
Yeah, maybe I'll leave the one last thing. I know I'm going a little off script, so it's a little dangerous, just be forewarned. I don't have a security service to sell you, right? I don't have security services and things like that to offer. But from the being blunt about it, the client, the customer perspective, and the security practitioner perspective, the solutions they offered here today directly map to the problems that we were talking about, right? I'm sitting here thinking about how we can scale our security testing to ensure every model, every platform, every product has some form of AI validation that we do from a security perspective. The solutions offered here today, like testing in isolated environments, will allow you to basically go to my other point, which is we tend to be bold in security and want to say we're going to protect everything, right? But if we protected everything, there'd be a computer unplugged in a dark room, not connected to anything, and it'd be useless, right? And at the end of the day, we have to be just as bold at finding out creative ways to enable the security testing so that that innovation can continue. Offerings like what we talked about here today allow us to do that testing without having to scale and test everything, so that the developers, the innovation, the design, the business teams, whatever, can have that opportunity to go and test in that somewhat secure sandbox that we test the perimeter of, but not necessarily every single thing that goes inside of it, so that when you finally get to a place where you're ready to invest further in whatever solution that they're building, you can then do your further testing on that, right? Giving you the ability to flex your resources and, again, be agile across the stack. So at the end of the day, right, really, if you walk away with anything, is be creative from the security perspective as well, and supporting both the innovation and the security side, and look for creative solutions like the things we've talked about here to ensure you can scale that effectively without burning 1,000 million people just churning and burning on risk assessments or security testing, right? So I won't be at the booth, but I'm also here afterwards for questions as well if you'd like to chat with any of us.